So the main criteria for this video is that these are all like global artists that you probably have heard of, or at least you recognize some of their most famous works. Apologies for my hiccups. I don't know, but maybe ate too fast, maybe drank too much. Not sure, but ignore it. But the criteria for this video, like I said, is these are mainly artists that you're probably familiar with, or at least their most popular works. So I wanted to highlight some albums that you know are from those artists, but they're lesser known works, and I would even argue they're better than their most famous works. And we'll get to if I actually agree if it's their best album or not, but I'll let you know it when we get to the albums. So that's just kind of the main criteria for this list. Also, these are artists that I'm actually into. Not to come off as like a poser or something, but these are artists that I do enjoy most of their works. But usually when you get to their most critically acclaimed albums, those are usually the albums that get talked about. I honestly don't really understand why it gets the most praise, because to me it might sound mediocre and to the rest of the world it sounds amazing. But I'm like, hey, it's a good artist. I like this guy, but have you heard this lesser known album? That's kind of the concept for this video. I think you get it by now. Just overlooked albums in a otherwise pretty popular artist discography. So I'll get to the first album, and this is probably the most popular artist on this list. It will get a bit more obscure later on. But I think these guys are globally known pretty well. And the other artists are a bit more like mucore based, but still pretty popular. So we'll get to the first one, which is Show No Mercy by Slayer. And I think we all know this band. I mean, you might not even be like a big metal fan, but if you're actually clueless about metal, these guys essentially made Rain in Blood, and they play the same style as music as Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Testament. But besides the Metallica, I never really got into more thrash metal. Outside of the big four, I might like some Exodus, I might like some Sodom. But I feel like no other bands really innovated in thrash. That's kind of why it died out in the 90s. I just don't think it really innovated in any way besides, the big four. I think they did some creative things, but I never really heard much innovation outside of that. Besides some Coroner, I like, what else? Sodom, like I said, I think they were way more aggressive. And that's what made them fun. Can I name other examples? I'm not a huge thrash head, like you can tell. I like the more gritty, like the more direct approach that Sepultura had, if you can consider them thrash. So, that's as far as innovation goes in my eyes. But this album just sounds way different. Like the production, it's a lot more lo-fi. It almost sounds like a black metal album in a way. And it's not, it's just like speedy thrash metal, like the genre say, with some traditional new wave of British heavy metal. That's kind of how it sounds. But Slayer, of course, isn't like a British heavy metal band like Saxon or was Diamond Head new wave of British heavy metal, or Motorhead, stuff like that. Tigers of Pangtang, I think. Yeah, that was new wave of British heavy metal. They're not one of those bands. I would consider like Saxon the best band in that genre, by the way. So there you go. But yeah, Slayer. They, I never thought they were like the best thrash bands around. They're way too sloppy. They sound way too muddy and too underproduced to really call the best thing of anything, to be honest. But to be honest, I really like the consistency on this album. All the tracks are pretty fun. The Antichrist is great. Evil Has No Boundaries is a great opener. Die by the Sword is arguably one of my favorite Slayer songs. It's a lot of fun. Black Magic, of course, was a big hit of this album. Fight Till Death. Cryonics is probably my personal favorite. The Final Command, also a really fun song. So, besides maybe Tormentor and maybe the final title track, I kind of love this album, like front to back. It's just like half an hour of direct, speedy thrash metal. It's a bit sloppy, but this is the tightest Slayer album of all time. Like no other Slayer album is this consistent, this tight, this fresh, this fun sounding. You get of course Hella Ways where they slowed shit down, and Rain in Blood where they everything went up to the ceiling. And Rick Rubin produced it, so of course it's gonna sound like shit. So I think that's ruined Slayer. Another band that Rick Rubin ruined. Yeah, and I think this is just their best sounding album in my opinion. Not necessarily for production's sake. I'll say the best produced Slayer album is probably Side of Heaven. But this is just the most condensed and the most diverse Slayer album, I would say. So it was always kind of my personal favorite in that sense. I just like how gritty and weird this album sounds, as opposed to other trash albums that are just way more direct and just a lot more meat and potatoes, like Overkill, Creator, Sodom, Testament. I think it's fun kind of pizza trash party shit, but there's not a lot of variety in the tracks. It's just pretty straightforward. And Slayer, of course, is known as the most obvious direct band of that style. But this album is just way different, and I find it weird that no other people really talk about it, because it's a lot more diverse than people make it out to be. They just kind of grab Rain and Blood and they say, yeah, all Slayer albums sound like this. And I'm just like, no, this is way different. This is a way different album than Rain and Blood. So why generalize Slayer like that? They actually had diversity and creativity on this album, but I guess because it's underproduced, people don't really see it in that light. I don't really get it personally. If I get tired of like Ride the Lightning or Rust in Peace, I just throw this on and I'm like, fuck yeah, this is fun. So yeah, I think it's really underrated, and I think it deserves more love. I think it shits all over Rain and Blood in my opinion. Maybe even Seasons in the Abyss. That might be crazy to say, but yeah, I just love the variety on this album. The album that comes closest to that diversity is Hell Awaits, but it's not in the same style as Show No Mercy. Like the title doesn't lie; it shows no mercy. It just goes for your fucking throat, and then some. The next album is actually an artist that I wasn't really into for a while, because Brian Eno is a pretty like minimal composer. This guy didn't create ambient music. That's what a lot of people say. But he definitely laid the groundwork, and he definitely was a pioneer in ambient music, of course. And I've really appreciated ambience, now more in reason memory. And of course, this album gets the most praise, Another Green World, which in my opinion just sounds fine. I'm like, it's all right. It's a fine record, but the album is a bit too posh sounding. It sounds a bit too like rich and enhancing to really be ambient. There's just too much shit on there for me to really relax to it. So that's the reason I can't really cite it as a favorite for me. I just think it's too much shit happens on it to really to really relax to it as an ambient album. And the things that do happen on that album, I don't find musically enjoyable. So the music doesn't satisfy me, and the ambient bits, they're not ambient enough for me to really fully endorse the album. So it never really clicked for me. That's also an album I could have included on the last video. 10 or so albums I can get into. That was a good one, but I do like Brian Eno, and this is my favorite album of his. It was kind of between Ambient 2 and Ambient 4. Because Ambient 2 sounds like a classical record, and you have like these beautiful strings on it that just sound gorgeous to listen to. But I found it a bit too, samey sounding for me to really put it on there. Which is ironic to say, because this is one of the most consistently same sounding ambient loops ever, in my opinion, or that I've heard at least. And this is a lot of fun. It's not fun in the sense of like it's upbeat pop music, because the title says, of course, ambient in genre tag. So of course it's gonna be a pretty quiet album. But as far as his ambient series goes, he ended it off with this album, and I think it's the best of the four that he did, actually, because it's just a really weird kind of avant-garde ambient record. Like, he actually made like a lot of dark ambient and field recording sounds on this album. He recorded that probably, and he looped that onto this tape. And when you listen to this album, it's just really enhancing. It's kind of creepy sounding. It's really enveloping. It really sounds like he's going for this really dark and rootsy atmosphere, which is a really cool fucking sound. I never knew that Brian Eno was capable of making a sound that gloomy, but I was really into it. I was like, damn. I just mainly put this album on for sleep time music, for bedtime music, and I was like, yeah, I can really enjoy this. Like, I put it on for multiple days, and I enjoyed it each and every time. And there were some moments, of course, where I was kind of like, what the fuck is this? Like with Shadow. Shadow is the worst thing on there easily. Shadow is kind of like avant-garde garbage. Like, it's just this lady or something that's yelping like a the ghost spirit of a goat or something. It sounds fucking retarded. But besides that, I actually really like every song on there. And Dunwich Beach Autumn 1960 is an absolute masterpiece. That song is fucking incredible. Like, the melodies on it, the atmosphere, it sounds like you're in this ghost town, and you're just enveloped by the spirits and by the atmosphere, and you're just fully engrossed in the experience. And if all the songs were on that level, this would be a master. This would be the greatest ambient album I've I've ever heard in my life. And it's not quite up there. There are some ambient albums I prefer over this. But I was just like, damn, this is really fucking good. And it surprises me because no one really talks about ambient 4, or that's how it comes over. I just hear a lot of people talk about the album that I showed earlier, his most famous work, and the first ambient album, the music for airplanes or some shit for airplanes and airports. That one. I'm kind of like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine music, but I never really thought it was all that great. And then you listen to like two and four, and I'm just blown away by the composition. It's incredible. It's an incredible record. I couldn't recommend it. I couldn't recommend it enough. Especially Dunwich Beach Autumn 1960. Listen to that song. It's incredible. It's such a masterpiece in my opinion. Third album kind of goes with the vibe of this room, I suppose. Is Congratulations by MGMT. And I actually watched the recent video that Fantano did on the 100 disappointing albums of Rolling Stone, and this album was on there. And I'm like, bitch, this is the best MGMT album. Like, you're high if you think this is a disappointment. Of course, Rolling Stone puts it on there because they're like, the first album had Kids and Time to Pretend or something. Yeah, that had like the big hit songs from MGMT, and it didn't have any of this like richy, like fancy Porsche kind of enhancing dense content on there. It was just straightforward psychedelic pop hits, which is great. I love Time to Pretend, and the single Kids is great. So that's still a great album, but I wouldn't say like it's my favorite moment of MGMT. I just think it's a pretty catchy record. But this is kind of like the apex of MGMT, because it's a lot more dense, it's a lot more layered, it's more psychedelic, it's more creative. Speaking of, Ambient 4 by Brian Eno, one of the songs is called Brian Eno, so I thought it was a fun segue into this album. Flash Delirium is a pretty catchy song. You have this like extravagant, like a densely progressive pop song on there, which is called Siberian Breaks, which is absolutely incredible. And that's such an incredible piece of pop music. I'm like, damn. If you hear that and you're not convinced that MGMT is like a great psych band, then what is wrong, It kind of flew over your head because it's just such an incredible piece of music. And I'm just kind of like, how can you call this a disappointment? They literally made a song about Brian Eno and a 12-minute psychedelic pop rock song. Like, how is that disappointing? That's a million times better than the hit singles on the debut. I'm like, this is the best shit ever. This is amazing. So I could never really understand the reasoning why people would overlook this album, or they say it's mid or something, or they say, the first album is better, or Little Dark Age, I think, is their most popular album today, I believe, which is also pretty good. I like that album, but it's not my favorite synth-pop album. But to be honest, the most, my favorite synth-pop album, Violator, I couldn't call that underrated. It's pretty well regarded, I would say. But I'm actually surprised that Congratulations is bolded and Oracular isn't. I thought it was the other way around. But Little Dark Age is bolded and Congratulations. But if you still look at the ratings, 22K, 16K, and 26K, Little Dark Age is definitely their most famous album. But Congratulations, I think, is the best. I just think it's the best thing they ever did, and you usually don't hear a lot from it. So I'm actually kind of surprised about that. But yeah, incredible piece of psych pop music. I really like it, and I think it deserves more praise. What can I say? The next album, also from a pretty popular band. You know, going in team with this list with this video. The first System of a Down album. It was kind of between this and Hypnotize. Those were always kind of the go to System albums for me. But I feel like this is a pretty consistent hit of kind of alt metal, and I've always really enjoyed the style of like avant-garde alt. This is also considered like nu metal, which I would agree with. It has those titles and influences there in the genre text. But I always thought that this album was more grittier. It was a bit more avant-garde. It had more variety in the track listing than as opposed to Toxicity, which Toxicity has like the great big hits, which are System of a Down's most famous songs. But it never really felt like a complete work, if that makes sense. Because you had a lot of hit singles, which were fun to hear, like Chop Suey, Aerials, that's probably my personal favorite. The title track, Toxicity. I think that Force was also a hit. But even with those songs, you get like a pretty direct hit of like alt metal. You basically just get dun, 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 that's Forest. And it is fun, but it is really samey. And that's kind of what annoys me about Toxicity, is that it's just too samey for me. So if you hear this, you get great songs, like Prison Song is pretty great. Needles is good. Dare Dance is one of my personal favorites. But then you get Jet Pilot, X, which are just filler songs. Like there's no need for them to be there. Chop Suey is great. Force is great. And Bounce I already forgot. That's why I never really got into that. Science, Shimmy. These are just pointless, like filler songs. Toxicity, of course, is good. Psycho, I'm kind of mixed about, and Aerials, of course, is a great closing song. So the hit songs and the lesser known B-side asks of this album are pretty great, but I would never call that the best System of a Down album. But everyone cites this the best as the classic one, and I'm like, no, it's not, because here on this album you get Sweet Pea, which is a great opener. No, Sugar was a big hit song for them. Suggestions is a bit of a quieter piece. D-Devil, I thought was a lot of fun. Soil is fucking awesome. War, I think it was either War or which one was it again? Where I think it was War. There was a one song where there was a really memorable moment in the track where they basically kind of played a higher tuned guitar riff, like that already sounds more progressive than the entirety of Toxicity. And then all the music stops and Serge Tankian just goes like, "Why did you take him away from us, you motherfucker?" And I'm like, wow, that's just so funny. Like I hear that every time, and I just lose my shit. And that's funny because after that moment, the band loses their shit. Like they just go AWOL on their instruments, and it's just a clusterfuck. That's just the fun thing about System of a Down. Like these guys just go berserk on their instruments, and that's what makes this band fun, I think. Mind also pretty good. People is mental. Qbert I liked. Darts pretty all over the place song, and Pluck just the gutturals that Church does in his vocals. I would almost call it a death metal moment. But to call System of a Down death metal might be a bit inaccurate. But that's just how all over the place this band is. They're new metal, they're alt, they're avant-garde, they're crossover trash. They just have all these different styles. That's what makes this album and this band a lot of fun. And I think that this album is highly overshadowed by Toxicity. I really don't think it's that good, and I think that this album is fantastic. So I think it deserves a lot more praise. Famous Monsters. I have to be honest, and I was never a huge fan of Danzig. I always thought that this act was a bit sticky. It was cliche. It looked a bit like this dude was kind of obsessed with being like a Hulk type or something, or like a macho kind of dude. But he was also alt or like goth. Like he was just obsessed with being like a goth dad or something, or like a goth hunk or something. And that look never really appealed to me. I just thought it was really annoying and pretentious. But with this album, Glenn Danzig doesn't sing on this, and it's actually Michael Graves, which I actually prefer as a vocalist. I think he is a way better vocalist than Glenn Danzig ever was. Like this dude sounds more poppy. He's more in tune with the band, and this album sounds really pristine and fun. I think that's what I like about it. That it's just a lot of like it's just a really catchy, upbeat kind of punk record. And I never really hear anyone talk about the later era of Misfits. Like you get the classic Danzig era that gets all the praise, and I'm just kind of like, it's fine. It's fine music, but I never really fully enjoy the experience. But then you hear this, and I'm just kind of like, you got the Forbidden Zone, Lost in Space, Dust to Dust is pretty classic. What else? Saturday Night, amazing song. That's so catchy. Die Monster Die, kind of in the same vein as Die Darling Die, but I think it's a lot more catchy than that. What else? Descending Angel is amazing. Fiend Club is fun. What else? Scream, of course, classic. And one of my favorites, Helena. Helena is like, the closing song of this album. So there are a lot of fun songs on this album. I still wouldn't call it perfect. There are some pretty forgettable songs on here, like Witch Hunt and Pumpkinhead. I don't think are great. But overall, this album is really fun, and I think it deserves a lot more praise than that it gets, actually. So I would definitely say that this is deserved of more praise than as opposed the classic era of Danzig. If you want to call it better, that's of course up to you. But I think as an overall experience, I think the Graves era is highly underrated, and I would really recommend you to check it out. At least the first two albums. Everything after this album is unlistenable garbage. So definitely avoid, um, and anything 21st century Misfits is shit. Like, it's unlistenable. Don't attempt it. Anything in the 20th century Misfits is great. You know, that's probably the easiest way to put it. But you know, I think they're the very latest 20th century Misfits album, Famous Monster, is, in my opinion, their best, or you know, at least their most enjoyable one consistently, I think. So that's what I think. But there you go. This is arguably my favorite one of the list because, you know, I'm kind of a sucker for Opeth. The album is like right there. Watershed by Opeth. And this is just a really fun and diverse album from Opeth that doesn't really get the attention that I think it deserves. Because usually you get like the big hitters that get all the praise, like Still Life, Blackwater Park, Damnation, Ghost Referees, which are all great. You know, I love pretty much everything Opeth, but this album, I don't really hear a lot of people praise Watershed necessarily, because it's just a really like off the deep end album that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about. And I think it deserves a lot more praise because it's pretty dense, it's layered, it has a lot of variety on the tracks. And this is probably like the most condensedly layered and the most diverse Opeth album ever. Because the opening song is literally like an acoustic ballad with a female singer that's just acoustic. It's basically a pop song. So your grandparents can listen to this and they would love it. You know, because it sounds like an ABBA tune, like a mellower, like kind of a downbeat, like maybe even Kate Bush kind of track. It's great. I think it's really great. Hair Apparent is like this straight up death doom metal song. So that's great. The Loader Eater is like this really weird proggy death rock song. Like how would you even describe this record, you know? It's like progressive metal, and then it's like death metal out of nowhere, and then it's like progressive rock. It's insane. It's mental. Burden is like this really mellow, sappy kind of progressive pop song. It's like prog rock pop and metal. You know, the solos are kind of metal, but the song is just in its entirety basically a prog pop song. So that's great. Porcelain Heart is like a prog metal single. Hessian Peel is straight up like a synthesizer instrumental. That it's just insane how varied this album is. It's really crazy how out there this album is. And X Omega is also just a really fun song. Probably the weakest one, but it has like a lot of slide guitars and a lot of dance and you know, just a lot of variety. I just really love the variety on this album. I can't stress it enough, but I just really enjoy the subtle moments on here. So I would definitely recommend this if you just love a lot of creativity, diversion, and a lot of variety in your album. Watershed is basically the most diversity you will ever get from Opeth. And Opeth is already a very diverse band, but they just knock it out of the park here. Arguably their finest album and my personal favorites, maybe. The Age of Odds by Sufjan Stevens. I think that this guy is most of the time pretty, you know, he sticks to one theme and to one kind of central genre to his music. But this album is a lot more layered. It's a lot more dense in atmosphere, and it has a lot of genre variety. Like I can maybe read 10 different genres on there, like pop, prog pop, art pop, indie-tronica, glitch pop, more glitch pop, folktronica, chamber pop, IDM, neo psych. This album is just so densely layered and diverse that it's honestly always just fun to throw this on and to just enjoy the experience. It's just a really varied album that I always think is just fun to put on. Futile Devices is a great opener. Age of Odds, the title track is pretty great. I Walked is good. Bad Communication is underrated. Vesuvius, I think, is a gorgeous track. I Want to Be Well is probably my personal favorite of the album. Like, I just really love the like kind of mellow atmosphere that it provides. And of course, Impossible Soul is just this incredibly densely layered and just this depressing, kind of hauntingly beautiful pop song that it goes on for 20 minutes, and that's already an adventure. But then you listen to like the last two minutes of the song, and he's just like, it sounds like Sufjan is actually like breaking down, and he's just on his knee and just saying his like last words before this album ends. That it just sounds like he wants to be happy, but he's kind of miserable. And it's honestly just the most gorgeous piece of music that I've arguably ever heard in pop music. Like, it's so dense, it's so multi-layered, it's so emotional, and it just goes on forever. So you can really get enveloped into the atmosphere of the album. But at the same time, it's also just catchy, emotional, and sentimental. So you just get the best hits out of this album ever. And I think for those reasons, it's an all-time great for me. But usually when people talk about Sufjan Stevens, you get most of the praise goes to Illinois and Carrie and Lowell, which are the biggest albums that he's ever done. And I mean, they're good albums, but I always thought that the theme of Age of Odds was more compelling to me. It was more diverse, it was more creative in my opinion. I always thought it was the most engaging Sufjan albums that I've ever heard. So for that reason, I think it's kind of underrated in this the discography of pretty popular big pop albums. So I think this is better than Illinois in my opinion. But maybe that's just me. 5 Leaves Left. 5 Leaves Left. My Nick Drake. I think that most of the praise goes to Pink Moon, and maybe even Brighter Later. But usually, this is just a really like pretty and a really creative sounding folk album. Like I already said in the last video, I believe, with Bob Dylan and Black Country, that this was always my go-to folk album, because you have these songs like Thomas Told Me and Riverman, which are just these gorgeously composed kind of folk songs where he has a string section behind it. He has this really this thickly layered atmosphere on the tracks, and it honestly just sounds gorgeous every time you put it on. It just sounds absolutely amazing to listen to these songs and enjoy them. I'm just really impressed by how and just how layered and just how progressive these folk songs are. It's just a lot of fun to listen to, and I think that it deserves a lot more praise than that it gets. I think 5 Leaves Left is already one of his most popular albums. But yeah, just look at this. It has half the ratings of Pink Moon. It's slightly more popular than Brighter Later, but I just feel like this is the best Nick Drake album, and most of the praise goes to Pink Moon. And I think this is easily his finest hour, so I would always prefer this over Pink Moon. It has more it has more full production. And I think that all the songs are arguably better than anything on Pink Moon. Still the best song I think is Northern Sky. That song is an absolute masterpiece. But yeah, I think this has the best collection of good songs on here. Like Day is Done, Cello Song is beautiful, Toss for Mary Jane, Fruit Tree I think is great, and Saturday Sun is maybe my second all-time favorite Nick Drake song behind Northern Sky. Just the the piano instrumentals, the cello, and just the string section on this song is absolutely gorgeous. It's so fucking beautiful. Like, how can one man make this? It's incredible, and people didn't even give this man a chance. He kind of overdosed on sleeping pills, I believe. After Pink Moon came out, because he didn't get any success with it, and I'm like, this man is a fucking genius. Like, how can people not listen to this guy immediately and go like, when was this, 69? Why didn't people immediately listen to this and go like, well, yeah, this is way better than Zeppelin and the Beatles? Fuck the Beatles. Let's just listen to Five Leaves Left. Why weren't people thinking like that? This is the best thing in that year. Like, fuck Zeppelin, fuck the Beatles. This is up there with King Crimson, I would say. Like, this is just the best thing ever in 69, and people were just not listening to Nick Drake. It's really sad. Now, of course, he's a cultural milestone, of course. He's like the best voice in folk. Speaking of voices, my voice is deteriorating. So let's just keep these last two brief. Drugs by Aphex Twin. I think that when it comes to like electronic music, Aphex Twin is of course one of the most familiar faces in that genre. And I think that most of the praise goes to his selected ambient work series, which is of course great. The first one is an ambient techno classic, and the second one is arguably the finest piece of ambient music ever. I do still think that Ambient 4 is better. And one other album that I might talk about someday. But yeah, if you look at the Aphex Twin discography, of course, his selected ambient works are pretty popular. And Richard D. James album is pretty up there as far as rating goes. Like, this almost is 50k, 25k, almost 30k, but this one doesn't even break 25, and I think it's easily the best thing he's ever done. Like, if you look at the track listing here, I mean, I can't even pronounce half of it. Like, look at these fucking titles. Bud de Unkoord, Kok 14, Afrol for 14, of course, is a pretty out there song, or out there. This album is pretty out there, but this song is like a really beautiful piano kind of loop. This was also one of my favorites, Mount Saint Michel plus Saint Michael's Mount. And that's just an incredible drum and bass song. Melt Place 6, that's one of the few I can actually pronounce. Zygomatic 17, Nanau 2 is great. Omega Switch 7. Like, the titles are kind of unpronounceable, but this album is just so densely layered and just so all over the place that I don't really get tired of the sound. It's just so out there and layered that it just stays fun to throw this on. And I do think that the Richard D. James album does a lot of this kind of similarly, but with the D. James album, it was kind of an idea, and with Drugs, he just goes all over the place, and it's just absolutely apeshit to listen to this album. And that's kind of what keeps it fun and in my rotation. Just don't try to get this on vinyl, because you would need to hand over your liver or your kidneys to actually get this on vinyl. It's mental, but still fun, I say. And then the last one, which is arguably not even underrated, but it's underappreciated in their catalog, which is Spirit Their Gone, Spirit They Vanish by Animal Collective. It's the titles have Avitair and Panda Bear, which is not the complete Animal Collective band, but this is basically their debut. And I find this album extremely underrated because you just have a lot of songs on there which they've arguably never really replicated, in my opinion. Like April and the Phantom, Penny Dreadfuls is great, Chocolate Girl, I've had it on rotation for years. La Rapid, I think, is growing on me. And then, the closing masterpiece, Elven Row, which is arguably the greatest song Animal Collective ever made. And they weren't even called Animal Collective back then. And that's how fucking good this album is. But honestly, if you look at the discography from them, it's usually like Sung Tongs even has more ratings, Feels has more ratings, Strawberry Jam has more ratings. Of course, Merryweather is the most overrated album ever, so of course that's gonna get a lot of ratings. But all these albums have more ratings, and I'm kind of like, guys, have we checked out Spirit They're Gone? I always thought it was like their best album, and Merryweather has like twice the ratings, but this album is like twice as good. So why doesn't it have the same accolades? So I was always kind of surprised by that, because it just sounds like the most diverse and the most magical Animal Collective album there is. Just all these songs that I cited are just fucking great. So why wouldn't you be into this album? That's kind of how I saw it. But there you go. You can't please them all. But yeah, those were my 10 picks of albums from popular bands that I think are underrated. Maybe some of these are not underrated, but they're underappreciated, like I said, in their discography. One other band that I want to give a mention that I think is underrated. Yes, of course, it's a pretty huge band, but I've always found Tales from Topographic Oceans to be underrated, because this is just densely layered, like symphonic prog, like this proggy adventure into like space rock territory. All the songs are long as shit, 20 minutes long, except for The Ancient Giants Under the Sun, which is 80 minutes. This album is like just so out there and layered that I always was kind of fascinated by it. And I was kind of like, why does Close to the Edge get all the acclaim? Well, I was kind of like, this album might be even more interesting, but that's just my opinion. I haven't really gotten fully into the album yet, but even then, I'm just kind of like, this album is interesting as fuck. So why don't more people talk about it? That's just what I think. But those were my 10, 11 or so picks. Let me know what are some of your favorite albums that you consider to be underrated. Feel free to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next vid. Peace.